Hello guys, welcome to our live broadcast. My name is Miriam, I'm the host, and with us is Andrew Ameral. He's an accomplished figurative artist and also runs a school in the Bay Area.
Thank you, Miriam, for inviting me to do this. I feel very honored and privileged to be here. And the school is the Golden Gate Atelier. Check it out.
Woo! So here we are, surrounded by some beautiful artwork. Can you tell us more about it?
Sure, absolutely. These are a number of paintings that I've done from life in my studio. So this is the typical work that I try to do in my studio. The self-portrait was a demo that I did for a workshop, and on my own I'll hire a model, or this is a portraiture of Annie. Jennifer is the model there in the nude, and this is a portrait of my dad. I did this right around the time when I came back from Florence, and I'd been overseas for 7 years, and it was just a really great opportunity to get to know my pop again after being away for so long, and really enjoyed painting him.
Wow, it's really like one of my favorites. I know it's probably like one of your first portraits out of the Florence Academy.
Right. Well, if I'm able, the thing I want the most is to be able to paint the things that I love, or paint the people that I love, and what better there's no better subject for me than to paint my pop.
Wow.
He's such a great man. So he said to me this painting was done in 6 sittings, and each sitting is roughly about 2 to 3 hours long.
Yeah.
And this was right before he was getting his operation to get his hip replaced. Probably a little too much information, but but he said to me, he goes, I know more about you now than I ever did when you lived at home, and that's the beauty of working from life and having that model and getting the opportunity to have a connection with another human being, and the process that we go through in painting, what it lends to developing that kind of connection with the model. I mean, that's what I live for. That's why I do this. So
it's beautiful, really. So I guess.
Wish I could have finished it though.
I like it this way. If you didn't say that you didn't finish it, to me, just like looks and feels complete.
That's great. That's great.
And there's
thank you. He's a mechanic, and been a mechanic for over 35 years. He's broken every darn knuckle and finger. But I love painting his hands. I mean, they're probably the most beautiful hands I've ever painted, because in every crease and fold, you just see the toils of his labor, just revealed in those beautiful hands. So, anyway.
Wow. And I was going to say, just the way that you did the hands and you painted them, it just, I didn't know he was a mechanic. But to me, it's just something like the way that she chose the pose.
Yes.
Just makes him look like a strong, working kind of.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
the poor guy. He wasn't used to using a cane. He had to because of his hip, and it was he's normally a very busy guy. So this was the few times that I could get him to sit because of his hip. And but after he got his hip replaced, I couldn't get him to sit anymore. He's a poster child for hip replacement. But, no, just wonderful subject, and I hope to paint him again. We should all paint our parents.
Woo!
If you can, if you're able to.
It's tough, but this really makes me want to paint family.
Paint them before they go.
Yeah. All right. Well, I see who's on. Destry, howdy. Avi says you guys rock.
Oh man.
Mark says he respects your paintings.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So today we're gonna talk about your art bio, how you got started in art, what really inspired you. Then we're gonna talk about in your opinion, what makes a great portrait artist.
Sure.
That's something I'm looking forward to hear.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer such a question, but I'll do the best I can.
You got all the experience. Look at your portraits. I know what you're talking about.
Oh man. Okay.
Yeah, and then we'll open up to Q&A. There's
Sure.
been some really good submission of
Great
questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So talking about your father, how did you really get started with art, and like what inspired you?
Sure. My earliest memories literally is me in a diaper with a pencil in my hand. And that was literally 5 days ago. I know. Okay, no. But my earliest memory, I was always drawing. And I think a lot of that inspiration came from my dad. My dad was someone who, when he was growing up, wanted to be an artist and illustrator. And my dad was also an avid comic book collector. So we would together, when I was a little kid, you know, we'd pop open a comic book and draw the characters together.
Yeah.
And I just found myself really enjoying doing that. And I was also a pretty quiet kid, so I was one of those guys and throughout school that'd always be in the back drawing monsters, you know. But I would say that was my gateway into this world. And it was finally when I was 24,
wow,
when I finally decided, and I think the right word for me would be, I finally allowed myself to pursue this.
Yeah.
I had to be 24. I went on it. I won't bore you with a long story, but I just went on this fast for 4 days, and I thought I was going up there for one thing,
yeah,
but I actually came down with a whole nother answer that I wasn't even expecting, and that was,
wow,
I'm gonna enroll in art school, you know.
Yeah.
So after this 4-day fast, I literally came down from the mountain. I kid you not.
Oh, really?
And, yeah.
Yeah,
And I came down. I'm like, I'm going to art school. And you know, I tell you, I have to say I'm so blessed. I have wonderful parents, and my mom was especially supportive of me. And I remember when I was so sheepish to tell them that I'm going to go to art school. You know, I was ready for them to just roll their eyes and go, oh my God. But my mom, you know what she said to me? She goes, "It's about time."
That's amazing.
And
how supportive.
yeah, that was great. And it was my mom really that was the one all growing up.
Yeah.
If you're going to be an artist, you better go to Florence. So
wow.
It was funny. Never did I ever realize, never could I know that at some point during my formal art education in Oakland, California at CCAC, that eventually I would end up in Florence.
So you started off first with.
Yes, I had 4 years of formal art education before I went to Florence.
And what type of
illustration?
Illustration.
Illustration.
Okay.
And it's funny. I feel again funny to say this. My degree is in drawing. You know, it's almost like saying my degree is in basket weaving. You know. But yes, I did get a degree in drawing. And I have to say, I studied under some amazing illustrators there. And what I loved about it was they were men and women that were very much tradespeople. You know, and I love that approach to it because in the end, that's what I came to school for.
Yeah.
I wanted to learn a craft, right? So I was exposed to it, or I developed my confidence with drawing the figure there. And then I went to Florence. That sounds like a cliche. I went to Florence.
Yeah.
And Florence, I wouldn't necessarily say they taught me how to draw as much as they refined the way that I draw, but they definitely taught me how to paint. And
wow.
I'm forever grateful to that amazing school.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what about now you run your own school, huh?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you came from back from Florence.
Come back from Florence. And keep in mind, in the interim time, because my story is kind of I won't bore you with too many of the details.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, huh?
But there was a period where I took time off from my training in Florence. I was working as an illustrator for 3 years.
Oh, okay.
And I just kept coming back to what I was exposed to in Florence.
Got it.
And I eventually, it was in 2002 when I went back to Florence, and I stayed there for 6 years.
Yeah.
And that's when I was offered the gig to also do the Ecrochet anatomy class.
Yeah, I was gonna say your anatomy courses.
Exactly, and I tell
really
you,
cool.
I'm so grateful to the director of the Daniel Graves and Susan Tintori to offer me to give me such an opportunity to not only study there, but also to instruct and then be able to afford, if you will, because you know. For any of us to be in any of these schools is very challenging, whether it be financially, physically, emotionally, whatever. And for them to give me the opportunity, basically, Dan said to me, "Hey, as long as you want to teach anatomy, you can be here all you want." You know.
Wow.
And I was, you know.
That's amazing. I mean, that's the end goal of it. How do you stay in this game, right? How do you continue?
Yeah, you know, I had a friend of mine. I might be, veering us to I had a friend of mine who she was getting ready to go to Florence and study at the school there. This could have been any atelier, basically.
Yeah.
And she was asking this painter, and I won't give the name, but he gave her some great advice. She goes, "Hey, I'm getting ready to go to Florence. You have any advice for me?" He goes, "I got two things to tell you."
That's great.
He goes, "The first thing is anyone that wants to learn this craft, learn this method, you should surrender yourself, if you will, to an atelier if you're able to, and just finish the training. Just take it for however long you can. Finish the training." She goes, "Okay, great." And what's the second one? The second one is know when to leave.
Oh, okay, that's great.
And that's none of these schools are. I'm talking a lot about schools because, my God, I have one of my own, and I've been teaching for so long. So it's easy for me to just segue into school, right?
Okay.
But I'm just saying that that's the thing, is that none of these schools are meant for you to stay forever. You get what you need and you go, you know.
Yeah.
And that's that.
Okay, so like in your experience, just for you, the bread and the butter was always teaching.
Well, that's what helped me to finish my you know. I tell you, I think
it's like struggles that, you know, I feel like all artists go through.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, even me, it's just like, how do you
make it work?
Yeah.
Right? How do you do it? And I have to say that it first starts with a desire.
Yeah.
And then the willingness to I'll do whatever it takes, and then a lot of luck. Right. I think it's a lot of luck.
Like timing and luck.
Timing and luck and I was very fortunate. I had wonderful people supporting me, and you know, again, when I remember that when I called up Florence and back in 1999, said, "Look, I want to come back."
Yeah.
You know? Actually, no, it was 2001. I said, "I want to come back," and they, I got a call a week later, and the director's, "Landy, I want you to run this anatomy course for me." And I mean, you just don't turn something like that down.
No.
You know, by the way, I had never sculpted.
Oh, really?
That darn thing.
Wow.
You know, never at that point. But it was, and I was scared, you know, but I took it on because in the end, I believe very much you teach best what you most need to learn.
Yeah.
And so I was very grateful to have that opportunity. I figured, well, I always wanted to learn this anatomy. Now I'm going to get an opportunity to do it, you know.
Okay. So for, you know, the artists who haven't heard, the crochet, it's a class that you teach, it's an anatomy course that you teach, right?
Right. It's a sculpting course where the student sculpts the bones and then eventually puts the muscles on top. And it's a really wonderful way, especially for not only for sculptors but also for painters and drawers that really want to get a much more intimate understanding of the shapes that we're trying to interpret, that we see in nature.
Yeah.
And what better way than to have to try to sculpt it, you know?
Yeah.
And what you're really doing is, so much of what we do is on memory. And what you're doing is burning these shapes in your head by having to sculpt these shapes. And every time you're pushing that clay, it's like you're doing 100 drawings.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the other thing is I love about that écrochet sculpture is such a wonderful vehicle, if you will, for pursuing that discipline.
Yeah.
And understanding form.
It's like interesting because you know, I look at the work in Florence Academy of all the students, and one of the drawings that I like love, you know, it ends up being sculptors.
Right,
Like,
for sure. And you know, there's an interesting thing in our tradition. You know, we you know, drawing is such a big part of what we do. It's the foundation of everything. And you know, we have this saying in our school that basically you only paint as well as you draw. You only sculpt as well as you draw.
Yeah.
So drawing really plays a fundamental role in helping us develop the familiarity with form. And that's often what happens with the écrochet as well, is that students that have difficulty sculpting a particular part, you know, ideally what I'll do is I'll tell them stop moving the clay around and now come back with 10 drawings of that shape. And then when they come back, ultimately they sculpt it 10 times better. You know? So it's in drawing that we begin our exploration. It's in drawing that we start tuning our eye and getting ourselves, ready to tackle on the complexity of the problems that painting and even sculpting present. And not just drawing is complex in itself as well. So.
Okay, so it's very interesting. So you started studying in the Bay Area. You came out as an illustrator, then you studied in Florence for
7 years.
7 years, and then now you're at a point where you're coming back to the Bay Area. You had enough of.
And I'll be honest with you, opening an art school was the last thing on my mind.
Really? So okay, you're coming back.
and I knew I wanted to teach.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful that I do very few things well, and I feel teaching is one of those things.
Yeah.
It's just something I like doing. I love sharing this information. I feel like I've had so many great, wonderful artists share their information with me. Mm-hmm. It's kind of my way of giving back. It's keeping the conversation going.
Nice.
Right? So I just feel like all I'm doing is playing my part.
Yeah.
Okay? So I feel very grateful to have that opportunity. So I've always loved teaching. I've always enjoyed that. And it's funny because I've had opportunities to teach other things.
Uh-huh.
But somehow drawing, it's like, okay, I could talk about that.
Yeah.
And I think why maybe is because I myself always will be an avid student. I'm always searching. So in a way, I'm inviting my students to join me on this journey of trying to figure out or develop this deep appreciation for nature, this connection to the subject from life, you know. So. And tune our eyes, you know.
Okay, so you're
I'm
leaving Florence.
I'm coming back from Florence. I
Yeah.
feel like I've been a tourist that's been there for too long. I'm ready to get home. There were other issues that were compelling me to come back. But I just remember stepping off that plane with €5 in my pocket. I mean, I literally had to start all over again.
Oh man.
And I eventually got a gig. I was assisting Bruce Wolfe, who's a phenomenal sculptor.
Yeah.
He's good friend, mentor. He's also my landlord. Landlord for the studio.
Yeah.
And phenomenal sculptor. Look him up, Bruce Wolfe with an E, Wolfe with an E. But I was assisting him in a number of his sculptures, coming back, making that transition. And I wanted to get back into teaching. And I ended up getting a job with the San Francisco Academy of Art. So I was teaching in their graduate program. I taught there for about 3 years.
Yeah.
And while I was teaching for them, I just kept wanting to come back to the experience that I had in Florence and what I was able to share. And I just want to do it right. And so we had this building, and I had 6 Ecrochet students, my first teaching here, coming back from Florence.
Yeah.
And I said, guys, I'm thinking about maybe starting a full-time atelier, and of that 6, 5 of them joined.
Oh, cool.
And that was the beginning of the school.
Oh, nice.
You know?
Wow.
And I tell you, I'm great. I tell you, I'm very, very grateful, and for all my students. They're all wonderful people, and these 6 in particular, I'm also very grateful. And the first 2 Ecrochet students, I had a class. In Florence, I went from teaching 15 students and giving a lecture to 60 to only having 2 students when I came back. And I remember in Florence, I used to tell the students there, I go, I don't care. I'd teach you if there was 100 or there was 1 of you, I'd teach you the same. Boy, was that put to the test when I first came back from Italy, But I'm so grateful for those beginning students because they are what gave me the money to paint the building, that bought the easels, that, it's like...
like collaboration.
Oh man, and all my family were involved with helping me prepare my mom, before she passed, she actually sewed the drapery, the backdrops that we have in the model room. I mean, I just... I'm very fortunate that I had such wonderful support.
Oh, I love that studio. It's like to me, it's paradise.
Oh, you're sweet. You're sweet. Yeah, wait till you see Florence, then you'll go, wow, that Andy, looks like a garage. Well, we do the best we can. We do what we can.
Hey, as long as it's got all the tools, I don't care if it's a basement, a dungeon, I'm there.
Amen.
Yeah, good teaching, tools,
there you go. Well,
the model, and
good teaching. I'm still working on that. But yes, exactly. Anyway.
Wow. Okay.
So, what do you want to try to hit some of these questions?
Next.
Tell me.
Next we're talking about, in your opinion, to be a good, solid portrait artist.
Qualities that make a portrait painter.
Yeah.
Boy, and again, I don't know if I'm qualified, but I'm going to give you my best shot.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the first is I think the first two that I'm going to mention is kind of the obvious. Number one, you got to know your craft.
Mm-hmm.
You got to know your tools. You got to
Yeah.
know how they react, right?
Yeah.
How they work. And unfortunately, there's no shortcut to that. You just got to use them over and over again and be doing it over and over again. What I love about this particular tradition is to me, it's very honest. You either do it or you don't. And if you
Yeah.
don't do it, you keep working at it till you do get it, you know? And so in other words, know how your brushes work. What's the difference between a sable and a bristle, a flat and a round? What kind of mark making do they make, right? How do you take care of those tools? How does your paint react? The alchemy of paint, when you mix one paint with the other. What's the difference when you use medium or with different canvases? This is all part of the craft.
Oh my God.
And these are things that you learn by doing it over and over again. What's the difference between a gesso traditional ground on top of a oil ground? You know, and why do you use those? These are things that you need to know, right? So you should learn you should know your craft.
Yeah.
The second thing I think, and very important, you need a method.
Uh-huh.
One of the best critiques I ever got, it was one of the hardest ones. You know, the students were all very sensitive, and you know, I don't know about you, but I was always like on that edge of that breaking point. You know, in other words, between being laughing with incredible bliss or running out of the studio crying and
Roller coaster.
exactly. And I remember one teacher, he saw me struggling with painting the figure, and when finally this session was over, he came up to me and he says, you know what your problem is? You lack a method. And boy, that was honest. It was right to it. At the time, it was a little bit of a hard thing for me to take, but I'm glad it was said, and off to Florence I went. I'm going to learn that method. I'm going to learn a method, because in the end, I sure talk a lot about school, and in the end, these kind of schools are just simply, I don't even like calling my school an art school. To me, it's more of a trade school. It's where you start. It's foundational. Whether you're doing representational work or not, you have this foundation where you've learned a method, you've learned this craft. So now you're not limited by what you don't know. Now it's just grammar, you know, and we're exposing students through our art history class taught by one of my good friends, Sean Forrester, also a graduate from the Florence Academy. Students are exposed to these old masters like someone in a grammar class studying grammar would be exposed to poetry, you know.
Yeah.
So we see this wonderful range we're exposed to, but in the end, I think all a real good art school can give you are those two things: is you learn your craft, and you have a method that becomes a springboard from which you will begin to build your career from. And let me tell you, the method that I do now is much different than what I was when I was a student. And at the same time, it's very much alike what I was taught.
But it led you up to this point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to have in other words, a method gives your work consistency.
Yeah.
You know, how do you start a portrait? You know, how are you able to when confronted with the complexity that nature gives you, how do you start one?
Yeah.
You know? And again, the method also, like I said, this is very important. It gives you consistency. It's very important for you to have a success. The success is what gives us the momentum for the next project. And by the way, all these paintings that you see here, what you're seeing is not where I'm at as a painter, it's where I was.
Yeah.
You know, I hope, or I'm hoping, or what I'm striving to do is to be better than I was the last painting. So what you're seeing is not where I am at as a painter, is where I was. Okay. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's great. Like me coming from like an engineered background.
Yes.
You know, just how you study things. There's always like a process. It's all about efficiency, and you know you'll get like a good end result. And that's like how the school teaches it. And yeah.
Right. Well, you know, it's interesting you bring that up, because that comes up to another thing that you might remember hearing me say among the students. You know, there's a number of things that I can tell when I'm looking at a drawing or at my own work, but when I'm looking at a student's work, qualities that I'm looking for. And number one is experience. You know, when you're looking at any painting, when you're looking at any drawing, you can immediately tell, especially if it's within this tradition, right? We're trying to be how can I say, honest with our interpretation of the model. um, um, you can definitely tell the painter's experience. What do they know? What do they don't know, right?
Yeah.
The second thing I think is focus.
Uh-huh.
You know, how engaged are they in the project? And I'm gonna bring it to myself.
Mm-hmm.
How engaged am I with the subject and the project that I'm working on? Because
Yeah.
I was at the San Francisco Academy of Art, and I had one of my students one time say to me, because, you know, my dad studied in medical school, and he said he learned my dad's a surgeon, he said, and in medical school he's learned two things that have helped him his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, whoa, number one,
Yeah.
being able to stand for long periods of time.
Yeah.
And he goes, the second thing is being able to study one thing
Mm-hmm.
for long periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
I go, my God, that's exactly how we paint. This is what we do here.
Yeah.
Right? There is a level of meditation that goes into what we're doing, and turning off the extraneous noise and really getting dialed into what's in front of us. It's often painters like this, we're hyper focused when we get into our into our zone, right? And you know, I don't know about you, but I find that zone very addicting. Like, I want to be there all the time.
Time just flies.
Yes,
and,
yes. And it's funny because it's in that zone where I find I'm the most free. It's where and that's why I love working from life, because I'm always saying, you know, I'm just, the models, the nature is always about 4 or 5 steps ahead of me. We're playing tag, and I'm trying to just get close. And I love that when I feel that I get to a point where every time I come to a painting, I'm always like, okay, this is what I'm going to work on. This is what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I love it when at a certain point of the painting is what's dictating me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I have to surrender, if you will, my will, and just let the painting tell me what to do. And that is the time, for me, when I feel the most free.
Got it.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So I guess to digress a little bit.
Yes.
If you're talking about aesthetics,
Yes.
what is it that's skill-wise important for someone to become like a portrait artist?
So
if you're going for realism, like if you're in this world.
So we talked about the first thing we mentioned again is we talked about, you got to know your craft. You got to know you got to have a method.
Yeah.
And in that method, of course, you're learning things as fundamental as proportions and how to see, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of I think of how we want our work to look becomes another very important part, is studying the old masters. Finding the painters that inspire you, that give you kind of an idea of the look that you want. Ultimately, when I'm trying to create, and I'm not saying that I'm successful with this, but I want to create something that's truly alive and beautiful, something that can exist in the world. They can walk off the canvas and exist. And for me, that is an incredibly difficult thing to do. Because it involves so much understanding of what's in front of you, right? And by the way, I also think that, this is a little side note, you want to get really good at portraiture, do a lot of self-portraits. And it might, to some, it might even sound kind of antithetical.
Yeah.
But we're all, the thing that we're most familiar with is ourselves and what we look like. We look at ourselves in the mirror all the time, right?
Yeah.
Brushing my teeth, shaving, whatever. So what I'm saying is it's very natural for us to inject our features into our subjects. You see that a lot, right?
Yeah.
Even the little Ecrochet sculptures, when the students are sculpting little heads, after a while, I'm like,
like,
oh, hey, that looks kind of like you if you had no skin, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, but you do these portraits so that you become so familiar with yourself that you don't put your features into your portraiture. And so, and plus, you know, you got this cheap and available model right there, you know? So I think that it's a great idea doing portraiture, that you do a lot of self-portraits, you know?
That's a good idea.
It's also a wonderful record. I've got self-portraits when I was 15 years old. Yeah. That's not me at 15, but well, he's got the brain of a 15-year-old. No, but I think I get my portraiture is better the more self-portraits I get. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So we talked about craft, and we talked about method, and then I started getting into some of these other concepts like focus and experience. But another thing is commitment and care. Very, very important. I mean, one of the best critiques I ever, I'm so grateful. I had so many wonderful teachers, And in Florence too, I had this teacher named Ramiro Sanchez. Ramiro, I love you, brother. But anyway,
Aw.
he one time was critiquing a drawing of mine, and he walked up to it, and he says, he's all, what the hell are you doing, And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, look at that knee. He goes, and I go, what, And he goes, you're drawing that knee like you don't give a shit,
Oh.
And I was like, it's not like I'm drawing stick figures here, but I realized something. It's like, care is so important in what we do, and you have to treat your subject like it's the most important thing in the world. And you have to find it sometimes, right? But that care, I believe, translates onto the canvas, onto the paper. And all those elements that I told you are so critical for, I think, making a believable and true portrait. And the other thing, too, is that ability to stick with it. Because oftentimes, especially when the painting starts to go south or the drawing goes south, I just feel that is nature giving you nature's telling you you're on the cusp of learning something. You just have to fight through it.
Yes.
It's in the, and that's what I love about the ateliers, because the ateliers are not product orientated, they're process orientated, and the standard is already there. Your goal is to meet the standard. So you finish that project however long it takes, and meet that standard, because it's from that you begin to expand your range. And that's critical, because I tell you, imagine I'm working on this portrait of my dad, and all I had was 3 hours. It never would have gotten here. And how much I would have missed, how much opportunity I would have missed to study form. Study takes time. You want to learn shapes, see form. You have to study, and you have to look at it for a long period of time. And that's critical. That's really critical, I think. So.
Yeah, gotta show some love to your paintings.
Yeah. See, you get me. I can ramble.
Okay, so that's great.
Should we go into these questions?
No, so I guess like one more thing then.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so now we know craft is very important. Just going through the roller coaster of painting a portrait, because there will be challenging times. And,
yes.
As long as you stick with it, you'll solve those problems.
Yes.
Okay, now the last thing. Now I'm making these beautiful masterpieces.
Oh, jeez.
And how do I get my work out there? How do people come and
Boy, that's an interesting thing, and that's something that's a really complicated question, especially in these times right now with COVID and lockdown and
well, just I guess based on your experience, how.
Well, social media plays a big part now. Putting together work and getting a portfolio together. I mean, that's such a big. That's another. We could do another podcast just on that.
Okay.
So, and I think you could probably find much better painters to talk about that particular subject. But
oh, you're too humble. You're working on a beautiful commission right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
and again, I always feel like I'm really lucky when I get these things. I mean, I don't know necessarily how my other peers find these gigs. But somebody, hey, I really like the way you paint, and I want you to paint a portrait I'm painting a portrait of a friend of a friend's wife. And hey, I want you to paint my wife, and Jesus, great, So I'm very grateful
through connections and friends.
Yes, exactly. Just
having a beautiful portfolio, it speaks for itself.
For sure, I think that's a big part of it. I mean, the quality of the quality of the work will sell itself. But again, there's so much more footwork that's involved in that, and the other thing too that's always funny with artists, and I won't get this. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but oftentimes we focus so much of our time in learning the craft that sometimes and I'm speaking for myself, I neglect the most important part of it is treating it like a business. And that's something that I recommend for any aspiring artist, that especially with the tools that we have now available to us. You get familiar with the social media, use these tools like Instagram or whatever to get your work out there and get seen and get yourself exposed. I think rare now is the day where you have to come in with a portfolio and go into a gallery and say, hey, look, this is who I am. They're like, oh no, get your Instagram, get your stuff going, and that's a good start. But I think the main thing though is work on your craft. work on your method, get your skills down, right? And for God's sakes, love what you do, you know? Yeah.
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 All right, great. So let's get into the Q&A now.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So the first question was from Michael, and he's from the United Kingdom.
Hi, Michael.
Hey, Michael. He's asking, I understand Florence doesn't award grants or scholarships or help with funding in the first year. Do you know how many students it helps in the following years? I'd be interested in attending, but the cost of 3 years is not possible. What do you think?
Michael, great question. You know, and the first thing I'd like to say is that I think I'm a terrible ambassador when it comes to Florence. I haven't been there in over 13 years. So I'm more than willing to share with you a little bit of my experience. First of all and foremost, if you get a chance to go to Florence, you go there, you go study, okay? It's a great school, and there's a number of realist schools in Florence that are fantastic, okay?
Oh, really?
Yeah, for sure. And so, yeah, Florence Academy is a great school, and more, I think also, you're studying in Florence, Italy.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the exposure that you have to that beautiful culture and that beauty, right? Oh man, that's a huge part of our training. Sometimes as students, we get so focused on, earlier I was talking about know your craft, know your method. We get so focused on just that it's easy to neglect a very important component is exposing yourself to the great masters. And looking at their work. And I believe that it just can't help but have an effect on you. And so you get a chance to go to Florence to do it. You know, money is always a big issue when it comes to these schools because it's a huge commitment. And we're not living in the 19th century where the state pays for our training, right?
Yeah.
Back in the old days, right? And so with all that said, I tell you this, I'll be honest with you, you know, don't go in these schools expecting a scholarship, okay? I mean, there's over, 200 students there, and everybody, all of them all have similar issues. You know, try to get yourself worked out in such a way that you're there for your year and you work really hard and to create the best work you possibly can, and then the rest is really a roll of dice, you know? And that's something to think about because it's, in the end, all these schools are privately owned and small, and you know, all the students are hungry and want to study there, you know. And but I was very, like I said, I was lucky, and I feel very fortunate that I had the opportunity that I had, knowing that that's not one that's given. Not everybody gets that.
Yeah.
Apply for scholarships. Start seeing the kind of quality of work that's awarded, and start pushing, using that as a gauge to elevate your own work, so that you're able to compete with those that are applying for those scholarships. The other thing is, keep in mind, what I love about Florence is a number of my good friends are still there, teachers and peers of mine, that are teaching there, you know, and they've been doing it they were doing it already for a long time before I showed up, and they're still doing it. They've been doing it for a long time, so you'd be getting great instruction. Talk to Susan Tintori. She'll be the one to answer your questions.
That's great. And just like speaking, you know, as a student myself, I don't attend Florence Academy.
Right.
You know, I study with Andy. You know, I feel like 90% of us come to these schools and you never know, like, if it's our last semester.
Totally.
You just find a way to start that first semester, like just finance the first semester, and I'm telling you, you'll get there. And you'll push and you'll find ways to really continue, and it might be like the strangest ways that you wouldn't know ahead of time.
Boy, Ameral, you're bringing up something really great, and Michael, this is because it's so true.
Yeah.
I didn't know when I first arrived in Florence. I didn't know whether I was going to stay there for one trimester, let alone a year.
Yeah.
And I ended up being there for 7 years.
Yeah.
Now, but I also don't want to. In that, I don't want to trivialize the reality that, my God, it's difficult.
It's very difficult.
And not everybody's able to do it.
Yeah.
And that's the kicker, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in the end, get an opportunity to go there, do the best work you can. no matter how long you're there, you're going to get a great experience, I believe, and you cannot help but be somehow impacted or influenced by that, by what you receive there, no matter how long you stay there.
Totally. I mean, such is the life of an artist. You know, you just take it like day by day.
Amen. You just brought up another point that I'm going to speak from my own experience. I have studied with multiple painters, gone to multiple art schools. So that's, to me, I feel like that's part of the gig. When you are trying to develop any type of skill in something that you are passionate about, you might have to find yourself going down all kinds of different avenues in what you thought. It's never a linear process, if that makes sense. But one thing I did was really grateful with Florence is that when I knew when I got in that school, I just knew that by hook, by hell or high water, this is it. You know, like I'm done. You know, I'm done chasing the guru. I'm gonna stay here and learn this thing. You know. Now I'm saying that knowing that number one, I have not arrived. I'm not implying that at all. I will forever be a student. But there does come a point, I believe, if you're given the opportunity, when you realize that your formal education is done, right? And I'm grateful that I was able to experience that. And that's something that I hope that my students in my school will also be able to come to a point when they're like, okay, cool, I got what I need here, and now I'm ready to move on. You know, that continuing here is just redundant, right? And I was very grateful. I felt it very viscerally. I was there for 7 years, but at the end of my 4.5 years, I was like, okay, I'm done, you know. So there's another really question I want to segue into because it talks about time. How much time does it take for the typical training?
Which one is that? There might be something on the other side, right here.
Yeah, maybe it's over here. It's like okay, I can't find it.
What should be the curriculum and timeline for the people? Okay, so next is, I hope I'm saying your name right, Vikas from India. And he's asking what should be the curriculum and timeline for the people who for some reason are unable to join Atelier Academy and are relying on resources, you know, online resources like NMA, Patreon, you know, maybe workshops here and there. It's a great question.
That's a great question. And, you know, in the end, you know, we're talking a lot about these ateliers, but look, you get the training where you need it. That's the big point. That's the, there are far too many great painters that have never been through this training. I just want to say that as well. Far too many great painters have never been through this training. So there's so many different avenues to get to where you need to go. A lot of it, though, really has to start with you as the artist being honest with, number one, what you want, and then where you are at. It's very critical. You know, oftentimes where I, as a teacher, get a lot of conflict with the student is getting them to understand that, look, don't confuse your desire with effort, right? That this is where you're at. And now once you understand that, then we can build from there. Now, with all that said, how long does it take? We advertise our school, and a lot of these schools advertise about 3 years. But that's kind of a misnomer, because in reality, there are two things that a student is constantly fighting. It's time and nature, and it's different for all of us. You know, I was in Florence ultimately for 7 years. And again, I ended my formal art education there in 4.5 years, but I already studied in another art college for 4 years. So what I'm just saying is, and I'm a huge advocate of the 10,000 hours, but what I'm just saying is that it's different for everybody. It just depends on your experience, and there's no mold for this. Some people come in with an incredible amount of experience and they push through the program pretty fast. And those same people also sometimes go the slowest too. And then others that have no previous experience, they're really absorbing this stuff and they move really fast. And others that have never had any experience go a real long time. It just really depends.
It's unique, and also just based like what you want to do too.
Exactly, exactly.
There's so many different
and how you're able to meet the you know, no one comes out of the womb painting like this. You have to be trained, and it just takes time, and it's arduous. It's tedious. And a part of, but that's important to understand that, because to make a painting like this is tedious.
Yeah.
And sometimes I had one student say, "Does it get easier?" No, it doesn't.
Gets harder,
It actually gets harder, because the
Yeah.
conversation becomes much more sophisticated than what it was when I was a student. The problems that I have now are way different than I was a student. But the other thing too is that, but I'm not saying that to discourage you. What it means is that you understand that that is part of the process. So instead of trying to fight it, you embrace it. And it's in that struggle that you improve and that you find yourself. You're not going to improve when things are easy. You improve when they're difficult, and you overcome that difficulty. And that's what I love about painting, because it just keeps getting harder and harder, and it gives me more and more. It's like, again, it sounds like an old cliche. It's peeling away the layers of an onion. It's giving me an opportunity to get to know myself, get to know where I fit in this, my place in all this. And it's funny, I'm mentioning myself, because ultimately I feel it's letting go of that makes us a better painter. Anyway.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All right, so another question was more about the color palette for the portrait.
Oh, sure.
And that came from Shamira from Florida.
Oh, Shamira.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your question. Okay. Before we go into that though, I'd almost because I almost want to start off with the limited palette. And then from there, why? Because I think it's just a great place to start before we talk about expanding the palette. So real quick, I've studied with a lot of painters, and one painter in particular, boy, he had a real complicated approach to color, which made me afraid of it. And just keep in mind that I was already going through art school, and typical of art school, established art schools, you're going to paint a lot of swatches. So I've painted a gazillion, so I've showed you a number of them too. I've painted a lot of swatches. I still don't know if the swatch has made me a better painter, but it definitely gave me an exposure to a little bit of how the paint reacts. But I'll never forget one day when I'm showing a dear friend of mine these swatches, and he's like, "Wow, this is a lot of work." He goes, "Why don't you just paint? Why don't you just paint from life, right?" And it was like, you're like, no kidding, It's like, yeah, absolutely. Of course, that's what I need to do. And what I loved was the limited palette. The limited palette just gave me 4 pigments to start with. Not 15, not 20. It's a simple triad. A yellow, blue, and red. Yellow, blue, and red. And a white, okay? And now, mix all the colors that you need. And just stay with that limited palette. Why? Because once you understand that limited palette, then you're able to expand on it. You know your pigments. I know how those pigments react. So when I add something else to that limited palette, it only complements what I'm doing. You get my point?
Yeah.
Before I was exposed to the limited palette, I didn't even know the difference between yellow ochre and cadmium yellow light. I didn't know the difference between those two. And being compelled or pushed, you just chew on this for as long as you need to figure it out. And then once you've got this, anything else we add to it, oh man, you really understand how they work. And that's the point. Because the old master paintings that I love and inspire me were always very deliberate. The old masters, I believe, didn't rely on the happy accident. I'm not saying the happy accidents don't happen, but we don't rely on that, okay? So every inch of that canvas is accounted for. So real quick, in the limited palette, we usually use, of course, lead white or Kremen's white. And then we have yellow ochre, vermilion, and ivory black. And always the hard part for a lot of students is wrapping their head that in the limited palette, ivory black is blue.
Oh, okay.
Vermilion is red. And yellow ochre is yellow. So it's a basic triad. So if I mix vermilion, ivory black, I get my violet. If I mix yellow ochre with vermilion, I get my orange, okay? And now I'm working with the fundamentals of a color wheel. Now, again, there's all different types of color theory out there. There's that incredible Munsell system. I think it's amazing. My brain doesn't quite work like that, right? But for some, that's for a lot of painters, actually, that's been a huge influence for them, and my hat's off to you. But for me, I set up a simple color wheel, if you will, that allows me to pull my colors down, mix them, and figure out how they react and work together on the model, on the canvas.
Yeah. Wow.
So the first is those basic colors, and really important, if you're going to work with the limited palette, you need to find pigments that are, how can I put it, you don't want to find a red that's too orange, you don't want to find a red that's too violet, you got to find a red that's right in the middle. And that's why we use vermilion, because if you find a red, for an example, we used to use a vermilion in Florence that was too much like a cadmium red. So then before you know it, all the paintings you're making are orange. So when you're working with such a limited palette, you have to make sure that the actual pigments that you're using are, how can I put it, right in the middle. They're like a neutral of that particular color. And that's why the vermilion is such a great pigment to work with. And again, we're really careful with the pigments that we give the students so that they're able to explore that.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. And again, just, look at old masters.
Look at old masters.
And so many of their palettes.
Often the limited palette's called the Zorn palette today because of that wonderful, beautiful painting of Zorn where he's in front of the model and she looks like she's hiding in the back from him, and he's got his palette exposed, and you cool. see the limited palette. It's called it, but that's Rembrandt's palette, man. That's Velázquez's palette. A lot of the pigments that we're painting today, that we use today, they're a 19th century invention. The pigments that they were using are the old stuff. The vermilion's been around forever. Lead white is one of the oldest pigments that we use on our palette. So, and I always tell my students, God, if it's good for Rembrandt, holy moly, it's great for you, And so it's a great point to start, but not one where to end, if that makes sense. It just depends on what you're looking for. The last thing I have to say is the power of the limited palette is your painting's already in harmony. Mm-hmm. The colors, you're not using these disparate colors that every one of those colors are going into every mixture that you're creating. So there's a certain harmony with that palette. Now, all these paintings that you see here, I might have started with the limited palette, but they don't end with the limited palette. None of these end with the limited palette. And that's where I remember one of the very first pigments that I used to expand my palette was alizarin crimson.
Oh, okay.
God,
the red one.
I love alizarin crimson. Ultramarine, red iron oxide. These are colors, cobalt blue. Oh, I love these. Every morning, every night before I go to bed, when I say my prayers, I thank God for alizarin crimson and ultramarine.
They're powerful
I just love those colors. And of course cadmium yellow light. Then there's of course Naples yellow. I mean, all these wonderful pigments that I would never have understood how they worked for myself until I had that foundation of the limited palette to build on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, just some things to think
about. I like it, like starting off with the basics and really just getting familiar with it.
Keep it simple, because painting is already so complex to begin with, and add 15 different, but on the other flip side, some people think more like that way, and that's cool. That's me. I need it a bit dumbed down. I need a little more simple.
Well, it's just based
I need to
on
wrap
your
my head around it.
Really. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so I think we might have time for 2 more questions, maybe one.
Sure.
So next one was from Walter.
Hi, Walter.
Yeah. Hey there. He's asking, he's interested in your thoughts on capturing likeness of your subject. Thank you.
Yeah. I think in the end, there's so much that goes into trying to get a likeness. And I think a big part of it, again, is study. Having time to look at that model. Now, ultimately, though, it's funny when I say that, because one of the things I loved about walking around the streets in Florence is there were a lot of those caricature artists, right, that would do those quick portraits. In a way, a good portrait painter really is a caricaturist. And that ability to capture that certain thing that makes that model, or makes that painting look like the model that you're working from, that's really critical. And I think a big part of it, again, like I mentioned earlier, do a lot of self-portraits, get familiar with what you look like so that you don't inject that into your own portraiture, right? You exercise that proclivity that we all have to putting our features in. And then finally, the other thing is just really spending time looking at studying that model. That's what I do. I keep working it until eventually And I use certain tools like the mirror to help me see the model in reverse.
Yeah.
Trying to look for an objective eye, turning it upside down, different things and you know, I'll tell you another thing that I do too that I think, because all of us have phones, take a photograph of your painting and then flip it in reverse.
Oh yeah, I love
and then
that.
look at it that way. I tell you, my proportions have improved so much by doing that. And because I realize, you know, I'm always making, you know, none of us are perfectly symmetric, we are asymmetrical.
Yeah.
But my tendency is to really go nuts with that, so that the right eye is really lower than the left, you know, and I get this Quasimodo look. And that's really helped me to, or I make one side thinner than the other, and just flipping it really helps me to see that objectively on the phone for something, because it's small
it's
as
like
well.
a refreshing the eye.
A reducing glass also really helpful to, you know, then you don't need to stand back so far. You just put the glass up, and it's almost like as if you're standing across the room, and it just gives you that perspective.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Oh my gosh, I feel like we can
How we
keep on
doing?
going. That's it.
That's it?
That's
Okay.
it for today. But we had so many good questions. I was like really excited to get to all of them. So maybe.
Thank you, Miriam, for putting this together. Thank you all for joining us. You know, please take anything, if anything I said to you is useful, use it. Anything else, just throw it out. But very, very grateful, very thankful to all of you for coming on board and listening to me rant away.
It was fun. It was fun.
It was great. This was fun. Thank you, Miriam.
Yeah, and then also, guys, just the last thing, I put some links into the YouTube description, and it has really good links to some of the suggested readings.
Sure.
Some of the books that the school recommends, and they're really helpful. They can actually answer like a lot of these questions.
Can I flip one up?
Yeah, sure. Show them one.
If you want, this is the best drawing book you could probably ever own. Is The Practice and Science of Drawing by Harold Speed. He also has a book on painting. And I tell my students, if you sleep with it under your pillow, it actually works. You'll wake up and
I'm not getting any better.
So their left hand, if you're right-handed, your left hand becomes a holder for your Harold Speed book. This is a great book, and I would have loved to have known this guy. It's just such a well-written book. But anyway, good book to have. Okay.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining us, and till next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.